Welcome, truth seekers and everybody else, to another episode of the Straight Shooters Show. My name is Todd Braley. I'm an independent filmmaker from Colorado, and with me always is the Thunder from Down Under and another indie filmmaker,
Itai Guberman.
Oh, dude, put some energy into it, man.
That's all they need to know.
That's all they need to know. Okay, that's fine. We'll just give them that then. And with us today, we got something super special going on here today. We have our first author on the Straight Shooters Show. Yes, she's our first author, but our first author, strictly an author.
Yeah,
here on the Straight Shooters Show. And we'd like to welcome Nicole Fanning to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Yay. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us. And
just to clarify, we've had some filmmakers who also dabble, in writing. So they're kind of, published authors, but I don't think we've had anyone who's written a full novel or anything like that yet.
Well, she has
2.5, almost 3 full novels now.
I was gonna say, yeah, she's got more than one under her belt for sure.
Yeah, the third is already in pre-order, right?
Mm-hmm. Third is in pre-order. So, yep.
Mm.
So get your copy now at Amazon.com.
That's right.
That's right. So before we get into the books that she's written here today, I want to talk a little bit about your past. So how did you, well, not the shady parts, but
I'm gonna have to get the key for the skeleton closet. So hold on a second, I'll be right back.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
There's a big lock on there. Yeah.
And she
I know.
humor. Not too many authors have a sense of humor. So Nicole, why don't you talk to us a little bit about your background growing up, how you got interested in writing, and kind of how you wound up where you are today.
Absolutely. So I'm sure a lot of authors say like, oh, I started writing when I was a kid, and that's very true. I grew up in a street that had no other kids my age, so I had to self-entertain. And my mom actually got me into this old school show that was called the A-Team. And when I say that I was, 11 years old and I was obsessed. And I would go and write my own episodes for the A-Team and then give them to my mother and expect her to mail them to the producers of the A-Team. And it didn't actually come to my attention that the show had been off the air for 2 years before I was born. Mom just kept taking those, letters and horribly written episodes and storing them away somewhere. I always kind of did it just for fun. I think that's always how I've written. I've written probably close to 11 different books. Most of them will never see the light of day. But they were mostly just fun to occupy time. And I remember when the pandemic started and we were immediately kind of forced into our homes, and we didn't know when we were going to have a social life or see any of our friends. I was like, well, I can either learn to knit or I could maybe write a story. So I tried knitting for like a week. No, I'm just kidding. But I decided that I was going to actually put to paper this like little bit darker kind of Stephen King suspense story that I had in my head. And just, again, for fun, to occupy time, to kind of calm anxiety about, when are we going to get to see people again? What's the world going to look like when we all resurface? It was more to just kind of self-soothe. And when I had finished it, I sent it to my best friend, again, just kind of like, hey, you're bored, I'm bored, we're both locked in our houses, enjoy this. And she read it and she calls me and she's like, this is actually really good. And she reads a lot. So I was like, okay, you don't have to be nice to me. Like, it's fine. You're my best friend. You can tell me the truth. And she's like, no, I need to know what happens next. So what happens next? And I was like, well, I haven't written it yet. So she was really like pushing that, we should put it out there. And I kind of just figured that, again, we only get to live once. And if I go to my grave with my name on a bookshelf and that was it, then I still accomplished something great. But I really didn't want that. I wanted Hody, as I call it, Heart of the Inferno, to be big. I wanted it to be like J.K. Rowling, Stephen King, James. I wanted it to be that big. I wanted people to love it and fall in love with the story. And so I put it on TikTok, and it just kind of snowballed. I had a few really close creators that were a little bit smaller that I reached out to and was just like, hey, would you give it a chance? Would you see what you think? You don't have to make a video for me. You don't have to post a review, but if I mail you a book, would you read it and give me your feedback? I'm a brand new author. And the feedback I was getting was that they were in love with it and they wanted to share it. And so it kind of just snowballed from there. And so it's just been really exciting. And then with the addition of book 2, we kind of just like exploded, and we brought in a lot more fans and a lot more people that are in love with the series. And so I'm so excited for book 3. So, but yeah, it started as a way to, kind of decide that I wanted to do something more with myself that would live on past when I'm gone. And also to just keep my mind busy. So this story had been kind of marinating for like 2 years, and I had a really long commute for this job I worked for. And I would just drive and I would think about it. And I had like everything kind of mapped out in my head, but I just didn't have time. And with the pandemic, I suddenly was gifted time. So it kind of happened from there. And it's been incredible. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I've just been shocked by like reviews or emails or letters that I've gotten from people. And it's just not anything I expected. So it's been, every day is amazing.
So when you say you put it on, you put it on TikTok, did you write the whole book and read it on TikTok? I'm just curious because I don't use TikTok. So I'm just curious how you do it.
So
I had a look. It's very cool.
of TikTok is actually called Book Talk. And there's different genres within there. Like if you like dark romance, if you like traditional, if you're strictly kind of a happy ever after person, if you like fantasy, there's all these different kind of little groups. But generally people kind of do a mix of, hey, I'm going to tease what the book is about, but also they have reviews from people who have read it. And reader reviews are the most genuine form of feedback that an author can get. And so every time I got a review, I was like just absolutely blown away. And I still am now. But they were the ones that kind of like propelled it forward, because if a strictly reader that people trust, like, hey, here's a recommendation that I read that I loved, if they get on there and they say, I love this book, you should read it too. Even if you walk away from that with 3 or 4 new people, that's 3 or 4 new opportunities for people to fall in love with your book. And so it became this snowball. And again, I love the story. I thought it was really authentic and unique, but we're biased, of course. It's our book baby, of course. So when I saw more and more people reading it, it was like a moment that I was connecting with people, even though I was stuck in my house. So again, it was incredible.
Yeah, I had a look at the TikTok. I saw that you basically put some kind of like a picture or some kind of something that has a bit of movement, like a video, and then sort of a passage. No, it's a very cool idea.
It's kind of a new thing that they're talking about called memeing. So you're giving a very vague, very small portion of the book, and it's kind of hinting towards themes or messages that you want to convey. So like we do some spicy, we, kind of do some like more to the romance side, more to the suspense side, because I did want it to be an actual marriage of Mafia and suspense. I wanted someone who enjoys Stephen King, James Patterson, John Grisham. I wanted someone to be able to enjoy picking up this book as much as someone who's like, yeah, I kind of like that darker, spicy romance. So I didn't want it to be one or the other. I wanted people of both genders, of like all nationalities, like to be able to enjoy it the same. And so it kind of surprised me. So, but it was a true marriage of the two. So it isn't just a saucy, grandma's romance novel. And it isn't just, this dark mafia thriller. It's kind of both.
It's 50 Shades of Godfather.
It is. It is. And you know what I think is kind of cool is one thing I found, especially with like the mafia romance genre, just like, kind of like any mafia TV shows or movies in general, is that it felt like people were really just like watching The Godfather and being like, this is how I think people in the mafia behave. This is how I think these underground crime organizations function. And that wasn't the case. And so I'm a huge nerd. I'm a big documentary enthusiast. I had actually been obsessed with kind of these, underground secret societies and crime organizations that exist around the world, that exist all around us. And I was like, I want to tell the story of kind of how I see it, because if you look at a documentary, obviously it's geared to be like, crime is bad, don't do it. But if you actually have an interview with someone who is either in, the cartel, the mafia, the triad, whatever, or you had someone who was associated very closely, so a family member, an ex-girlfriend or whatever, they have a very different perspective on what their experience was. They talk about how there's all these themes of honor and family and loyalty, but not to a government or an ideal or in a religion, but to the family. So the family is kind of this all-powerful be-all, end-all, and their loyalty kind of exists to that. And so I thought that was a very different perspective that people weren't talking about. It was like every time you picked up a mafia romance novel, it was someone saying, I'm a bad man, Janice. And like, that was it. That was all you got. But it was like no background, no functionality, no seamless transition that kind of connected it. And so that's kind of the story I wanted to tell.
Yeah, because the whole Yakuza thing where I believe, some early sort of mafia organizations, they were all about honor more than anything else and protecting
huge.
Their
very
own.
much so.
Yeah.
And they would, and something that is also big in my novels that's different is I have a main mafia don who has 5 or 6 men that are his alpha squad that he trusts, and they run the different aspects of his business. And so I had, feedback from people, some fans that were like, yeah, it was just really different because usually it's just the mafia don and he doesn't trust anybody. And I was like, right. But when you think about the functionality of how these organizations exist, they have to have that trust. They have to have those people they can count on. And in return, anyone signing up to be part of an organization like this is expecting to get a fraternity, a family. They're expecting to get like, I'll watch your back, you watch mine. So I just felt like that was something that was really lacking and it didn't feel authentic. So I was like, what if I tell the story where like we're falling in love with the characters because they're a little broken. They're little bad guys that they do bad things, but they have their own moral code in a way, a shape or form. But you're right. Yakuza was very much about honor and family.
Like The Sopranos.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of.
Yes.
I was just going to say that because a lot of that.
Or if you ever watch Peaky Blinders or something like that, like also very similar.
Yep.
So.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking about The Sopranos, about Paulie and Chris and Pussy, and how they were Tony's main guys and all of that. Yeah. And that made the show all the more interesting.
Right.
And if anything happened to one of those guys, it wasn't like he'd be like, okay, well, you swore allegiance to me, so sorry, you're dead, but whatever. No, there would be retribution. There would be, because again, they signed up for that fraternity of men. There is a love and an honor there. It just maybe isn't to the U.S. government or any laws in general. It's to the family.
Yeah, and spoilers to anyone who hasn't seen The Sopranos, but with one of them betraying them, there was quite a story there in The Sopranos and how that was dealt with. So
there is betrayal in these novels too.
Of course,
in Ignite, there's a good one, and again, we get to see how that plays out, and the effects that it has, but. There's so much that does rely on trust. And again, they have their own kind of system. So it's almost like you have to forget that what they're doing is bad because they have their own system of morality. And I think like in book 2 is one of my favorite scenes. There is a bad guy who, kind of owns a newspaper company that was going to print something false about our main female character. And obviously our Mafia Don is not going to allow that to happen. So he handles it. And at the end of the scene, he's kind of worried about how she's going to react because, she just witnessed someone. And he goes to her and she's like, I get it now. And he's like, oh, that I'm a monster. And she's like, no, that there's worse monsters out there. And Jackson's like, yes, I am a bad man, but I'm a bad man to keep other bad men in check. Like, that's kind of how he sees it. So he's that last line of defense, but there's a whole hierarchy that's built in. There's a lot of mafia lore that's here too. Mm-hmm. So it's very juicy.
So you basically just kind of dug in and did a ton of homework. It sounds like, which is yeah, to me is very, it's admirable because a lot of times people will just go off of stuff that they've seen, and not the good stuff they've seen, like the crappy mafia movies that have been made, and right. It's just refreshing to have people,
sorry.
No, you're good. To have somebody that will actually do the homework and understands, how things ran in the past. And that's where the fall of the entire, the whole mafia, it all came crumbling down when John Gotti got in charge and their loyalty ceased to exist because now it was every man for themselves. And, I don't like the way things are being run. So I'm going to do this, this, and this. And they forgot about La Cosa Nostra and they just, it was now it's all about me. And, right. And that's cool to hear that you've done that extensive homework because
I just think it's fascinating because, I lived in Naples, Florida for a hot minute. And they actually, had a big ex-mafia population once they turned state's evidence, kind of got dumped in the Keys and like all of South Florida. And that's kind of like where this obsession started, because again, you did in the old days. I mean, even if you go back 100 years, like morality and things that were acceptable and things like that, it was different than kind of how it is now. Like there's a lot less that would be tolerated. And so when you have these generational mafia dons that are, coming down the line, they're inheriting that mentality, but in like a whitewash format or like a strict, kind of like a watered down version. And that when you have kind of like that dispersal of every man for himself, that's where things kind of get crazy, because then you don't have those hierarchical systems. You don't have that sense of like honor and loyalty built in. But these organizations are still existing all around us all the time. And you'd never know, because that's the whole point. It's, back when you had your big mafia dons in Chicago and New York and everybody knew about them, that was different than it is now. Now it's kind of anonymity is the advantage here. So they operate in that world. They control the direction of things. But, the average person just goes about their life and has no idea. And, I have my mafia don kind of explains it at one point that it's like an ecosystem, how his system is set up. So he is in charge of kind of monitoring the underworld, things like that, the levels of crime. And he has a working relationship with the government, with the powers that be in his city, that he's going to maintain a certain level, but not let it get above that level. Because then our ecosystem's out of balance. So you have to have people that are getting arrested, committing crimes, so that you can have police officers employed and you have rehabs and you have all these different, government systems. So they need to be fed as much as like we need to make sure that the place is safe and the city is cleaned up. Right. And Jackson just kind of say, I have Jackson say, saying Jackson like he's a person, but it's me. But he just kind of says like, it's kind of one of those things where you could have the city cleaned up in 2 weeks if you really wanted to. But then, what would you do after that? Then you'd be, giving layoffs because you wouldn't need as many cops. You wouldn't need all these different things. So it just kind of keeps things in line. And the one thing they can't do is kind of draw attention. So he's like talking about how they have to keep a low profile. Like, he's not a low profile, he's a billionaire, but he has a legitimate business on top of having this, you know, system in the government that he's running in the mafia underworld. But he describes it as an ecosystem that you need predator and prey. And so he's allowed to kind of run things the way he wants. He delivers a different kind of justice, as long as the noise levels, the chaos levels, as long as all that stays calm and, you know, nobody's asking too many questions, then they're good.
Yeah, the ecosystem you're referring to, like in a lot of, you know, as Todd describes it, there's been a lot of bad ones, but in the good ones, about the mafia and about crime, they describe it as just, it's pure economics. You know, that whole ecosystem. It's like, if you get rid of crime, then the town would fall apart, you know, the city, because, you know, all of these. In a lot of cases, the mafia actually ran the city programs. They like ran for like the elderly and social security in, you know, I don't know if it was, I can't remember, but I know in Italy, there were parts of the town where the mafia was in control of everything and they still took care of business, you know, and kind of the way that I have Jackson set up is that he believes that human beings should have the choice for everything. If you want to sell your body, the government shouldn't tell you that you can't. If you want to do drugs, the government shouldn't tell you that you can't. So he looks at it from the perspective of, I am the provider of the things you're not allowed to have. I give you freedom. Like, he's providing freedom. And that involves doing things that are illegal, but again, he's in his own little world. And so, with its own law.
Well, and that's one of the things that I think, you know, being a huge mafia buff myself, and I did a lot of homework on Carlo, the Gambino crime family, obviously, you know, up past John Gotti and whatnot. And that was one thing that I think, you know, when we talk about the downfall, is that Carlo Gambino, I mean, he lived in this little dinky house. I mean, to look at the house that he lived in, you would never know that he was in charge of this mafia crime family, and the cops, you know, the FBI guys that would go to his house and have to arrest him. You know, they were talking about the interiors of his house. He says, you know, he looks like Geppetto. And here we are arresting Geppetto, but he never even, I get kind of irritated when they have showed him in movies, and there's a lot of dialogue where sometimes with Carlo Gambino, he would not say a word.
Nope,
he would just,
less is more.
It would be a nod. It would be a hand motion. It would be anything just to make sure that if they were bugged, at least later on when he in the you know, the 50s and 60s, when they started, you know, coming up with the whole system of being able to listen from outside in the street. It was always really on the lowdown. And then once he relinquished power, and everybody, you know, and then you had Paul Castellano that had taken over, and he was more running it like a business, literally. And the other guys didn't like that. You know, when Gotti was just very, very adamant about not wanting to let this guy, he felt like he was running it into the ground. But then when Gotti got in control of it, he really ran it into the ground, because now all of a sudden he's on on Time magazine. He's in the newspapers all the time. So he literally took it and just trashed it even more. And the fact that, you know, and the last of it, they brought up John Gotti Jr. after Senior went to jail. Junior just destroyed the Gambino crime family at that point, because then you had all these young guys and they were running around. They were just, they were the Italian rapper thug life guys that basically destroyed that whole ecosystem, because they had
and provided a whole kind of cast for people to write, like people write about one type of mafia gangster. Right. They know one type. He's Sicilian, he's got this thick New York accent. Like that's what they think about. And
right.
Nothing could be further from the truth.
Right. So, I mean, that's the thing, the fact that things have kind of gone back to that whole anonymity thing, is people need to think, the mafia is not gone by any means. They just went
absolutely
back.
Not.
They went back.
Although I'm half worried that someday someone's going to show up at my door and be like, you know too much. How do you know too much?
Like, dude, History Channel. Okay. Come on. Are you
documentaries?
I know.
Yeah. It's like, are you seriously questioning that now? There's more shit out on the mafia now than there ever has been. So yeah, be gone with you.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
And again, you'd never know if you met this man in a grocery store or, you had dinner with him. But you're absolutely right. Like a lot of times they're very intentional in what they say. Mm-hmm. You'll notice that. And it goes back to the whole idea of being bugged and things like that too. But it's also that, again, they are weighing a whole different system. They're living this whole other life that, they're putting on a show. So they're kind of like a cast in that. Mm-hmm. And I always, I have Jackson as a character, whereas Natalie is more upfront, open, who she is. And we get that perspective. When we hear from Jackson, he's kind of a think twice, say once. He thinks about something longer. He's intentional. He's trying to be 2 steps ahead. That's where he likes to be. But everything they do and say is intentional. And, it is very based in loyalty and honor and adhering to that system and kind of keeping their way of life, their status quo.
So he's more of that sort of old school mafia mentality.
Very much so. Again, it seems like in a lot of like modern mafia romance in that category, when we're referring to the romance side, that a lot of these dons, it's like one of 3 plots. It's either, they're from warring mafia families and they're forced to get married and they hate each other. And he's disrespectful and rude and cheats on her all the time and does all this stuff. And, then the next one is that she saw something she shouldn't have seen. So now she's kind of like their prisoner and she falls for him via Stockholm syndrome, or he's just bad boy and she's in love with him. And that's the end of the story. There's no plot. There's no nothing there. But again, all of these mafia dons all go back to this idea, like they all seem to have the same reoccurring lack of consent, lack of respect when you're reading them on paper. And Jackson is, again, more of that old school mafia don. He is an asshole, if I can say that on your podcast, to everyone. Again, he has a legitimate business. He's also a billionaire, like hotel owner. It's like, I'm a hotel owner. I'm in the news all the time. Everybody knows me because I own hotels. But then he's also running this family. But he is a jerk to everyone. And he's even a jerk to Natalie when they first meet. But after that like connection and that respect is formed where, she saves his daughter from an attempted kidnapping and he doesn't understand that. That's not something that computes with him because he comes from this world of currency where nobody does anything for free. So who is she? She's got to be from another family. She's got to be from the FBI. She's something. There's no way that she was just right there, saw it happen, decided to act, which is exactly what happened. She just couldn't let that happen. And he doesn't understand it. So he's very much like trying to interrogate her and she fires back and she's just as feisty. And after that respect is formed, he treats her like a goddess. Like she's on a pedestal. Like if it's very touch her and die. But he would never disrespect her. He would never like force her into any kind of intimate affections. He wouldn't disrespect her in that way. And again, it goes back to that old school mafia mentality. You know, did they have mistresses? Did they have other lives? Like, that's a story for each individual person in each individual situation. But in this story, I'm going back to the ideals that we saw over and over in actual documentation and history on the mafia of disloyalty and honor. And I just see him as a man that would be that way. Like, kind of, like, can I swear on your podcast? Is that allowed?
Absolutely.
Okay. So he's a very much like, fuck everyone who isn't us. Like, that's kind of his mentality. His men, his family, that's it. The world could burn, and he would burn the world if anything happened to her. So, you know, there's a scene in book 2 where they have a run-in with the cartel. Because again, all these organizations across the world are aware of the other organizations across the world. You know, like, if you're trading and you're doing business, they may not be like best buddies that are going to brunch together and sharing, you know, great war stories, but they definitely are aware of the existence. So in book 2, there's a run-in kind of with some members of the cartel. And there's somebody who's like, you know, you want me to believe that Jackson Pace, you know, hotel prince of luxury, would blow himself up for a woman. And he's like, I would like you to believe that I would burn your whole city to the ground before I let you take her. And like, that is who he is. Like, outside of his little world, doesn't care. He's not a save the world kind of guy.
Yeah, no, I like that, because you mentioned all these like tropes that they generally use, and one of them is always that he might be, you know, a mafia guy, a mafia boss, but he wants to get clean, to go legal, and that is almost never the case.
Yes.
You know, they will have their legal businesses. Yeah.
There's nothing that I hate more in a romance, whether it's traditional, dark, or otherwise, where you have, you know, girls, people love like the bad girl mentality, or the bad guy mentality. Girls love that. But as soon as they get together, as soon as they become a couple, then they like mush into this blob personality that's like one character. And suddenly you have this mafia don who kills people, you know, or tortures them, suddenly like putting on some eco-friendly outfit and going to drink appletinis on the beach and talk about his feelings. That's not who Jackson is. Like, even after, you know, we see, because I did promise there'll be a happily ever after at the end of book 4. Even after we see that happen, like, he's still Jackson. He still has those you know what I mean? Like, he's never going to stop being himself. Because I think that the beauty and the way people love a series is when you have two very unique characters, especially from like a point of view of first person, that they're very unique in their own way, and they don't just become the same person, start talking the same way. You know, again, guy who kills people suddenly talking about his feelings all the time.
And he wants to become good for her.
Yes.
You know, that's always the thing. Yeah. It's like, okay.
I got forced, you know, I was forced into this and I don't really like it. And, you know, oh my gosh, it's over and over.
Yeah.
Or they're justifying it, or they're not. Like, they're saying he's a bad guy, but it's just the perception that he's a bad guy. He's actually a good guy. Like, no, that's not what we're going for here.
And her becoming a little bit bad for him actually is more interesting.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it is something where what I wanted, especially since, you know, the series is called Catalyst, or the first book is called Catalyst, is where we have these two unique characters who are very yin and yang. You know, he is that kind of scary, angry side. She's, you know, the heartbeat. But they collide, and neither one is ever the same again. You know, so Jackson does pick up a little bit, you know, he is a little bit more lenient, you know, he says thank you once in a while now. Like, that's about the most that we're going to see out of Jackson's personality changing. But he's still polite. The same guy. But on the flip side, you know, we see Natalie, where before she was introduced, like, yeah, she was a good girl, but she was very much like Jackson in a lot of ways. She was very impulsive. And we hear a story about how she, you know, saw this kid drowning and she jumped in this river after him. And so we see that they do have things in common, just in different ways. And so she gets a little bit of a badass personality from this, but again, she's still Natalie, the same way we have our characters separated. They come together, they kind of rub off on each other a little bit, and then, you know, they're still the same characters. Hopefully that makes sense.
So just out of curiosity, I mean, what was it that made you go that route? I mean, obviously, one, you wanted to be different and do something that everybody else isn't doing, but what was your thought process to just keep them and not go that mushy route, like, oh, I'm going to change anything.
I guess I just didn't think that that's like real life. I mean, I think even when you are in a long-term relationship with someone, your personality, like you rub off on them the same way that they rub off on you, but you're still unique people in that regard, at least when it's like a healthy relationship.
Right.
And again, like I just kept seeing the same things over and over. I felt like every time I could pick up a Mafia romance, it was like rinse and repeat. Like we've changed a few of the plot points and the names, but the dialogue's the same. The ideals are the same. He's a non-bad guy who's a bad guy. Like, no, we can love broken things. We can love bad boys, bad boys that are unrepentant and love what they do. There's nothing wrong with that. I just felt like we were trying to, I don't know, just doctor up and water down other previous Mafia stories.
Yeah. There's something actually I wanted to go back to. You said you started writing this when COVID started.
Yep.
So less than 3 years and almost 3 books. That's a lot in a short time.
So book 1 took me 8 months to write, and book 2 took me 4 months. But I didn't have a life. I didn't leave the house. And those book 1 and 2 together is about 35,000 words, or 350,000 words for books 1 and 2. Book 1 is about 150,000. Book 2 is about 200,000. So they're thick books. But yeah, I had book 1 kind of already in my head, but I was busy and like giving it half attention for a while when pandemic started and I started writing. And then when, book 1 kind of ends on a cliffhanger. And so I knew that I'd have to crank out book 2 pretty quickly. But I had the whole plot for all 4 books already mapped out. It was just a matter of sitting down and actually doing it.
So is it tougher now because things have opened up a bit, so it's not so like you don't have to be at home all the time? Do you find it become a bit tougher to write? It's tougher now only because like when you're a writer, you realize that writing, like you're writing for like 10% of the time, and then the other 90% you're making content or doing podcasts or stuff like that. So there's more that comes with it. But what's really exciting is just like talking to all the fans and seeing, they are like them making their own fans like from that process and getting those 4-page long fan emails that are like, this is the best story. And it's, oh God, I couldn't get enough of that. That I'd give up sleep for. And sleep is my favorite thing. So yeah, totally worth it. But it was a lot of cranking. So basically 350,000 words between 2 books in a year. So 2 books were written in the same year. And then, book 3 has taken a little bit longer only because when I first started the series, I named it Catalyst because I wanted it to like follow the 4 stages of fire. So like scientifically you would have a catalyst, then you'd have an ignition, then you'd have the flashpoint where it's burning the hottest, and then you'd have the embers or the decay. So I wanted 4, but I was like, I also don't want a book that just has mindless fluff in it. I kind of check out of a book when it has too much, pointless filler information. Yeah. So Catalyst goes 90 miles an hour, Ignite goes 140 miles an hour. Like we are not stopping. And there is nothing in any of these books that isn't relevant. There's, ultimately there'll be 14 books in the series. But these 4 are going to be the main kind of like the canon. So I knew what I wanted, but I also was like, I don't want to risk saying, yeah, let's have 4 books and then not have content. So I was like, I'll just be conservative. I'll make it 3. So originally this was going to be a trilogy ending with Flashpoint.
However, once I started writing it, I realized that the character arcs that I had kind of developed they needed more expansion. It just didn't feel the way that Ignite did. It felt very rushed. So it has since become a tetralogy, I think, is it now? Like it's 4 books. And I get my 4 stages of the fire. So I am quite content with it.
I've heard quadrilogy before.
Quadrilogy. Yeah, I said that. And then somebody's like, that's not a word. And I was like,
yeah, I was told the same thing.
I'm using it. It works.
If it says that on the Alien DVD pack, it says quadrilogy, I'm going to use it.
There we go. So that's fair. I will accept that. Yes.
Quadrilogy director's cuts.
Yes. Yeah. So
the pandemic is basically the best thing that's ever happened for you. You know, it's like hello.
It was beautiful in the sense that, again, I just started doing it for fun, just to kind of occupy time, but it kind of resurrected that little kid in me that wanted to grow up and be a writer. But then, you know, when you hit 18 and you go to college and you do the whole route, you got to get a big girl job and do big girl things. And, you know, that side of you that had those big fun dreams is kind of gone. And so with the pandemic and having that time that we didn't often have, it felt like, it allowed me to reconnect with her. And now, like, you know, regardless of what happens to me, or, you know, if the book ever becomes a multi-selling millionaire movie or something, it's still going to live on past me. It's still in existence. It's still here. So that young version of me is proud. And so now I'm getting to do what I love to do. You know, I'm getting paid to do that. And that's the goal. You know, that's what we all want to do, is to be able to do what we love. So it felt very true to self to be able to go back and do that. And, you know, I suffer from horrible imposter syndrome. I have, it's going to sound terrible. I have a book that, you know, was recommended to me by some fans and family that was like, hey, you know, print off all like your sweet notes, those things that like people say to you. And when you're having, you know, a bout of imposter syndrome, thinking like, this is the worst story ever, and I'm awful, and I don't know how to write, go read those things. And I tell you, like, I cry every time. It's incredible. So it's, you know, to know that my work touched someone else out there and will live on after I'm gone is probably one of the coolest things. So.
Well, and that's always something that, you know, all of us as, you know, artists, kind of, work towards, you know, and even if you only get one person to say, you know what, that book or that movie that you made touched me. It made me cry. It's like, did my job, you know?
Yep. That's it. Okay. I did it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say that, I always said that I wanted to be seen and heard as a writer. And I think there's a difference because, you know, you can, again, write anything you want. You can, you know, put whatever you want on the cover. You can, you know, not have an editor. You can do whatever you want. If you just want to have your name on a book on the shelf, of course, anybody could do that. Anybody could go and write that story. But if you want to be heard, if you want to be remembered, if you want your book to touch people, then, you know, you have to put the effort in. You have to do the research. You have to build characters with, you know, that lovable connection to them. You have to, you know, hint at messages throughout the series that do touch people. And, you know, there's things that you have to do, and you have to decide if you just want to be seen or you want to be heard. And some of my like most intense fans are ones that fell in love with the series before it went through kind of its revamp with like the new covers and, you know, the better like formatting and all kinds of things. And they are the most intense because they fell in love and connected with the characters when like the book did not look as good as it does now. And that's so exciting. But it was, you know, kind of that conversation that I had with people in the industry where it was like, hey, you know, it's a great, unique story, but it is all about packaging and it's about presentation. And it's uncomfortable sometimes to talk about, hey, I wrote this book and you should read it. I often feel like a used car salesman trying to peddle cars like, hey, you should read this. It's really good. People like it. But
there's nothing wrong with that, though. I mean, there's, you know, if you got something good and you want people to take a look at it, that's what you have to do. You know, some people will say,
absolutely,
well, that's an inflated ego. It's like, you know what? I put a lot of fucking work into this thing, and I, you know, people are telling me it's really good. I was super happy with it when I was done. I mean, Ty and I both know that in regards to our movie projects. And it's like, you know, no, it's not my ego. I don't, you know, I think it's good. You should watch it, or you should read it, or, you know,
right.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I feel like again, like it's the decision between like, what is it that you're really seeking out of it? If again, it's just, I want to put my name on a book on the shelf. Okay, great. Like go home tonight, write it, print it, put it on Kindle. Like you can have that. You can own a book with your name on it of stuff that you wrote. Right. But again, if you want it to go further, if you have bigger dreams for it, which like I do with the series, when I was approached with, you know, the feedback of, hey, it's a great story. You know, the characters are great. The plot line is unique. It's gripping, but like I think they said like, we hate the font, we hate the formatting, and we hate the covers. That's what they said. And I remember my publicist was like, you know, so he was so afraid to tell me like that they don't like the covers and they don't like the formatting. And I was like, that's it.
If that's the criticism, that's awesome.
Right. Yeah. I was like, they're like, well, they said, you know, the covers look like they were homemade, because they were. Like I made them myself, and I am an introvert. I'm not a graphic designer. They were not as beautiful as they are now. And so I was faced with that choice of like, hey, do you really want to propel this forward? Do you want to invest in the series? Do you want to hire an editor, a formatter, you know, get it beautiful, package it up nicely, you know, have it like, because the cover it was beautiful, but it didn't make sense with the story. And so, you know, we found that combination now, but it was that choice where, you know, you love it. It's your baby. You could leave it as it is, but if you want it to go further and, you know, win the Olympics of books or whatever,
the book Olympics,
the book Olympics, you have to put it through the ringer. And you also, I've learned that I also have to grow as a person, because I am a bit of an introvert. I'm a writer. I would prefer to be left alone in the dark with a book and a computer and a cup of tea. But no one would ever hear about it. No one would be able to fall in love with the characters. You know, the suspense that we've generated for book 3 is insane at this point. Like I can't keep up with it. It's amazing. I'm so excited. But it took a lot of me conquering my own fear of talking to people, of talking about the book and, you know, saying, hey, I wrote this thing, like, hope you enjoy it. You have to get over those things, and you have to grow. You have to be able to take criticism. You have to be able to say, you know, what criticism you're going to accept and learn from, and what you're going to just let brush off your shoulders, because not all the criticism that you get is useful, is something that, you know, you should put into place. I've had people tell me how they think the plot should go, and there's no chance of that happening. But I've been like, thank you so much for your feedback.
The what should go?
The plot. So I've had people message me and the plot and tell me that, you know, oh, I love Jackson, but like, I really want this to happen. Can you make this happen? And that's
right on that.
No.
Well, I have one criticism for you.
Sure.
You just said that, you know, to be left alone to write in a dark room with a cup of tea. What kind of writer are you? It's got to be coffee.
Very true. Very, very true. I have an unhealthy coffee addiction. So that's very true. Tea is the nighttime drink. Coffee is essential in the morning. No one wants to be around me before I've had my 4 shots of espresso. No chance. But it takes a lot of sacrifice. You know, it started as something that was fun. I love your mug, by the way. I am obsessed. But it started as something that was just fun. And then it was like, there's a lot of potential. And when writers talk about, or, you know, even film artists like yourself, so much goes in on the back end that people will never see. Like I've probably written 1 million words, and right now I have about 500 that are in print. So like there's a lot more that went in that came out. There was a lot of surgery that took place. There was a lot of growth that took place. I'm sure you guys know this. Like so much effort goes into the littlest of things. And one of those like has to be you. And like, it's what separates the men from the boys too, like, you know, or women from the girls, everybody. But it's typically when authors hit that second book that a lot of times they're like, you know, I'm not a best-selling author. I don't have a 50 Shades of Grey contract. I'm done. Didn't work. You know, my first book came out and nobody read it. Nobody read it because you were a brand new author and no one had ever heard of you. And you were uncomfortable because you were an author and likely an introvert and didn't really want to talk about it. So you have to be willing to say, this is a labor of love. This is a passion. And, you know, kind of like Rocky Balboa, you just keep going even when life hits you and knocks you down. You got to keep going. So, yeah.
I was asked that question quite a few times. Like, what does an artist need, to have that sort of edge? And I said, well, one of the main things I think, aside for obviously, you know, talent and work ethic and all the rest of it, you need a chip on your shoulder.
Yep.
If you don't have that chip on your shoulder, if anything, you know, the smallest thing goes wrong, you quit.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like, oh, okay, I'm not a filmmaker, I'm not a writer, I'm not a this, I'm not a that. And I said, you can't have that kind of mind frame, when you're dealing with this kind of thing, because you're going to fail and fail and fail and fail and fail until you succeed. And then it'll all be worth it.
That was 100% the hardest lesson, Itai. Like because I'm a perfectionist. I'm a type A person. I'll share hilarious stories about the first time I uploaded my first manuscript to Kindle. I wanted to die because I spent all this time formatting it. And then I upload it to Kindle and it won't accept it. And there's all these errors and it formats weird because I didn't know what I was doing because I was a brand new author. And I had a week of reformatting. So here I am like, yeah, I'm finally going to like put my book out, and then lesson learned. And I remember there were times that I wanted to quit. There were times that like, you know, someone left a review that was not so nice and it broke my heart. And I was like, why am I doing this to myself? And your resilience and your ability to push forward is the only way you're going to get better. And it's also, you know, what's going to separate you from people who give up. Like it's just one of those things that the harder you go, the more committed you are. Like it resonates in your work, in your films, in your music, in your books, in your art. Like you can tell the artists that didn't give up, but also learned lessons along the way. And like their love and their passion is in their art. So there's lots of ways to be discouraged.
Yeah. And what you were talking about before, we kind of have to hustle. It's just, otherwise things don't move. We have to keep pushing them. Yeah. And people always, ask me again about this. Isn't that all like, shameless self-promotion? And I'm like, yeah, it is.
Yep.
I feel no shame about it.
Nope.
How do you think we get
like,
the
why
word?
would I? Yeah,
there's a sound on TikTok that's like, you have to tell people about your products. You have to tell people about your products. And it just repeats over and over, but it's so true. It is.
Yeah. And I said, if I didn't think my work was good, maybe I would have some shame in promoting it.
Yep.
But I do believe in it. So of course I have no shame. It's like, I'm going to promote it as much as I can.
And it's also, I was on a panel once, and another indie author or brand new author kind of chimed in and asked the question, what do you do if you are uncomfortable interviewing? Like you want your book to be good, but you don't want to interview. And I was just kind of like, you just have to do it anyway. Like
get comfortable.
Right. And it doesn't matter if you're beautiful or if you are eloquent or if you can speak well. What matters, especially for readers, is the authenticity. Like the reason that TikTok has Book Talk and it's so popular right now is because readers have the accessibility to message authors. And they get to it would be as if, you messaged Stephen King and he responded right away, and Stephen King got to talk to you. It was something that other, older generations didn't have that we now have through TikTok and these apps. And it became one of those things where it's like, they want to see that you are authentic, that you are, to them, like they are falling in love with your story, but also that you're a real person and that, there's a love and a personality behind that art as well.
Yeah, and they do need to see your face. It's one of those things. I'm also introverted. I used to hate having a camera sort of pointed towards me. I mean, I still do.
Yep.
But
me too. I do too.
Yeah, once I started making films and getting them out to festivals and putting them out online, I was being sort of approached with, all kinds of interviews and stuff. And I thought, you know what, I got to do it. I'll just do it. I just won't think about it, and now I'm like, it's like hosting shows and all of this kind of stuff. It's just, I wouldn't say it comes naturally, but I just ignored all the, everything that tells me not to do it. And I just do it, and that's it. Just take it as a fact of life and move on,
Yeah. Yep. And, it's not like you're exchanging a part of yourself in order to do that. It's kind of like the Grinch, right? Like the heart is growing 3 sizes. Like you as a person are just growing. You are like acquiring more. And, in that is the ability to have those interviews and, deal with the anxiety. And, my advice to anybody who's brand new and nervous or, doesn't like doing podcasts is just answer slowly, not, obnoxiously, but think about your answer before you say it, just make sure that it's authentic and from the heart. And, it does get easier with time, just like we develop a thick skin. I remember the first sad, not so nice comment that I got on my book, Baby. It was like someone telling me my baby was ugly. I cried in the shower for like 2 hours. And now, someone leaves a comment or says something like that. And I'm like, okay, thank you for your opinion. But like, I can move on. I can say like, all right, that's fair. Because as much as we want our art to be for everyone, it's not going to be for everyone. Like,
and that's how it should be.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. Well, and
if everybody liked it, it would not be any good, I don't think.
Exactly.
All right, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That was part 1 of this episode.
Part 2 will be coming up very, very soon. So look it up on the
Straight Shooters YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.
See you soon.